This summer, the new hardware from SKAARHOJ is in fact software. It's a universal firmware that goes into any of our controllers and will allow you to not worry about whether you need to buy this one or this one to play a macro in your ATEM switcher, because any of them can now be configured to control the same features in an ATEM switcher. It's all browser-based, so it means with any modern web browser, you can change the configuration of the units. And for you as a video consultant, it makes it really easy to add value to your offerings to your customers, because you can create custom solutions with our hardware. You need a quick idea about what this is. So let's take this C31, one of our classic, nice, small, masculine controllers, and show you how easily you can change how this works. Okay, so right now, as you press any of these buttons, you're selecting sources on preview. As you pull the handle, you make a transition, auto, cut. It's all very easy and it makes sense when you look at the buttons. Okay, so if we now bring this unit into configuration mode, and you do that by a pen tip and pressing a button in a window for a few seconds, and then the unit will boot up in configuration mode. It's now in configuration mode, so we can access the web interface of the unit. And this is how you have always been setting up IP addresses in your SKAARHOJ devices. In the web interface, you see a graphical representation of your controller, and what we do now is we press with the mouse. We can just click any of the buttons on the controller, and then we can select how this button should act. So you can see right now, button number 1 is configured to bring sources on preview. And in this case, it's source number 1 for button number 1. Button number 2 will bring source number 2 on preview, and so forth. If we go to the auto button, you can see it performs an auto function in the ATEM switcher. So how easy do you think it would be to change this to cut directly on program? Let's try. Basically, you just go to the menu, you select program source instead of program preview, like that. So it's still source number 1. So we can just go to the next one, program, 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 and program. So now in this case, you might also think, okay, what do I need an auto button and a cut button for, since we go directly on program? And you're right. So we just simply remove this function, and the same with the cut button, like that. And all that's left is to go to the button in the corner, press save. When the page refreshes, we can now power cycle the controller, and it boots up. There we go. It's connected to the ATEM switcher, and as I press the buttons, you'll see in the ATEM software control, sources are selected directly on the program bus. It's actually not true that we don't have any new hardware for you this summer, but you might have seen that in a different video, because we made a variation of our popular E21 controller, which hosts the bigger broadcast buttons that are known for from some of our bigger panels. And one of the most spectacular units in that series is the Smart Switch version, which is shown right here. So as you see it on the table, it is connected to an ATEM switcher, and the input select buttons just select the preview source, and if I press here, we have a cut action. If I hold down the shift key, I'm now allowed to select sources 6 through 10. So as I press here, you see that those sources go on the preview row. 9 and 10 are disabled because this is an 8-input ATEM switcher. So of course this is automatically reflected with the universal firmware. Also, as I hold down the shift key, such as an auto transition will be triggered instead of cut, because this button has also been divided like that. So a new thing you didn't see on the C31 is that we have a switch button, sorry, not a switch, but a shift key on the controller, which will allow us to select alternative behavior for any interface component. We also have a information display, which shows us that we have a connection to the ATEM switcher, and then finally the fancy Smart Switch menu, which works like this. As I press the button, it will toggle through or cycle through various options which I've configured in the firmware to be available. Like this one, which will allow me, when I rotate the knob, to change the frame rate for a mixed transition. Take this one, auxiliary source. Currently it's set to color 1, so if you look over here, we have the auxiliary here, and as I turn this knob, you can see that I'm cycling through the various input sources. You can also see it from the ASIM control panel. Up here, it's always nice to see how it follows around as I turn this knob. Okay, so then in this case, we have configured that you can select the transition style. So if you want to go to a different transition style, you can do this. What we like is to create simple, user-friendly controllers without a lot of bells and whistles that will confuse the simple users that just needs an operation which is safe and secure without the possibility of changing a transition in the middle of a show. So this is why we like to pack stuff like that into a smart switch menu, so you can just enable it if you need it, and if not, there's no way you can mess with it. And how did we do this in terms of configuration? Let's go to the interface, the web interface for the controller. Again, this is a web browser talking directly to the SKAARHOJ device in configuration mode. So this is self-contained, it's on the controller, you don't need extra software, just a computer with a modern web browser connected to the controller. And if we look at the buttons for input selection, it's really simple, just like you saw before. ATEM, program preview, select input number 1 on program or on preview for ME1. This is what it says. But differently from the C31, we also have a shift alternative behavior, which is to put input number 6 on preview in case the shift key is held down. And the same goes for button number 2.7, button 3.8, 4.9, 5.10, and so forth. So the way you make a interface component behave differently in case the shift key is held down is simply to actually add a new level and then select shift here. So for the cut auto button, same thing. By default, it's a cut, but if we hold down the shift key, it's an auto transition. So the shift key itself, how did we configure that? And the shift key does not send any information to the ATEM switcher. This is entirely a controller system parameter which we changed. So you can see as we press the shift key, it will set shift level 1 as long as it's held down. So as long as I'm holding it down, it's in shift state 1. As I release the button, it goes back to shift state 0. And this is what makes the change across all the features here. So just quickly, the information display here is set up right here. So there's again a system function called system info, but in fact you could also set up the information display to show many other states in the system. It could be, for instance, it could display what sources on program, which media still is on media player 1, and so forth. But the default behavior is system information. And then there's the smart switch menu, this exciting thing. So you see there are a few more lines of configuration, but still it's really only this that will allow you to build such an advanced menu like you just saw. So it's really, really easy. And as you see, the first item in the menu is transition rate for a mixed transition, and by default it's set to 25 frames. If I press the button, the next menu item will be select auxiliary source for auxiliary 1, and the next one would be select the transition style for ME1, cycle through, and the final one would be to execute a fade to black. So, do you want to add something? All right, let's try to, let's say we want to select media stills. So the first thing we need to do is, because the controller is not in configuration mode, we need to bring it into configuration mode. And as I said before, I press and hold the config button. The controller resets. I hold the button until the LED lights up blue or white. And now I can, just to make sure that we have connection. Yes, okay. So the interface has reloaded, and I can now go to my smart switch. I click the smart switch menu, and now I want to add a new item to the smart switch menu. So I press the button here, and I select OK. So I want to go down to media still, or media player still, for media player number 1. And let's see, what do we have here? Cycle, hold down, toggle. So you can see stuff like hold down and toggle would be more relevant if it was a button that I pressed. So I could put a given media still onto the media player if I press a button. But in this case, I just want to cycle through. And this would allow me to make a limit to which media stills that I'm going to select. And if we go to the ATEM software control, just quickly, we can see that in the media player, we have loaded some lower thirds, and then we have some other stills there. So let's say we just want to go through the 4 lower thirds. If I select 4, I'll now be cycling through those. Okay, so what else? We could also change this one to auxiliary 2 instead of auxiliary 1, and let's just save and then see this awesome stuff happen. Yeah. So let's power cycle the unit. All right, so let's go back to the interface here. And because we are now selecting sources on auxiliary 2, I'll just bring this menu up so you can see. As I go to the smart switch menu, I press here. It now says auxiliary 2. We have color bars on auxiliary 2, and as I turn the knob, you see I now go to color 1, color 2, and so forth. It's all shown in the smart switch display as well as in the software panel. That's great. Okay, let's go continue, and there's the new function. Media player number 1, index number 1 is currently selected, which is Casper, my name tag. And as I turn the knob, you can see it goes to index number 2, which is named Björn, and then index 3, Georgie, 4, John, and then it goes back again. So it's cycling through media stills 1 through 4. Isn't that great? That's the universal firmware. At this point, I'm sure you can see the great perspectives of the universal firmware for all our controllers. And just to assure you that even our big controllers like an E201 like this one actually runs on this software, you can see how that could be configured. Obviously, a little more advanced, a little more things, more features and so forth, and we'll not go into detail with that. We'll have some tutorials later, but of course this controller runs on it too. And as a video consultant, this should really be a great way for you to serve your customers with custom tailor-made solutions based on our standard hardware. Okay, I want to go back to the C31 and show you something which is also quite powerful, and that makes the controllers really flexible. So I'm just going to rewire here for a moment. And you may remember that we started out by changing the buttons on this controller so they put sources directly on program. I wanted to be able to do that and also to select to preview and maybe change sources on an auxiliary output. So I booted into configuration mode. Right. By the way, all these things are of course documented. So in fact, we actually have written the documentation for the whole thing already. So you won't be left in the blind. You'll have a proper explanation. You see over here, proper explanation of all the features of the universal software. That's just a side note, but this will be published along with the devices and the software. So let's just reload the interface for the C31. And just for now, I want to keep this configuration, but I want to create a new preset. So this is about presets, and a preset is that I can save a different configuration in the controller to serve another purpose, and then I can load it when I boot it up. So let's just quickly change this one so it selects on preview, program, preview, program. So I'm basically setting it back to what it was before, but with a little change. So I'm just putting these back. Okay, and then this should just look at how quickly I'm doing this. I think I'm doing it in less than a minute. I'm just changing how this controller works. And then instead of pressing the save button, I'll go to the bottom of the page, and then I will create a new preset. So I type in what should this preset be named? I want it to be named preview program. And then I save it as a new preset. Save to. All right. So if I scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll see that I have now preset 1, preview preset, preview program, and all these settings, including the IP address, will now be different. So for preset number 2, I have all these settings as I had before. If I go to preset number 1, load, you'll see that the settings are now as before. We are selecting or switching directly on program. And then I'll just quickly rename it program. Save. And then the final one I want to do is I want to create a new preset which switches auxiliary 1. Okay? Auxiliary 1, save to. And if I go to the bottom of the page again, you see that I have now 3 presets selected down here. So for each preset, I could also change the IP settings. So the idea is that I can take this controller, I can move it over to this context, and then I can take it to another context. And by loading the preset, even IP settings will be changed right there. But let me just quickly, for this preset auxiliary 1, change how the buttons react. So now we are changing it to selecting auxiliary output source for auxiliary 1. Okay, auxiliary output to, so there's just some quick changes here. And there we go. All right, and since we don't have any transition on auxiliary, I remove the T-bar functionality and we are good to go. Okay, so let's power cycle the unit. And now you need to notice how this works. When I power up the unit, 3 buttons will light up, representing each preset in memory. One of them will be highlighted a little bit, representing the current preset, and that is supposed to be button number 3. And this is what I talk about. You see, button number 3 is highlighted, 1 and 2 was also dimly highlighted too. So let's go to the ATEM software control, and now we have preset 3 loaded, which is selecting auxiliary sources. So as I now press button number 1, button 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I am changing sources on auxiliary 1. I now power cycle again. And then I want to go to another preset. So I take preset number 2, hold the button until it lights up red, and now the controller changes and loads preset number 2. And that was the preset selecting on preview. So I can now go to the switcher here, and you see as I press the buttons, it is changing sources on preview. And guess what happens if I reload or re-power cycle the controller and load preset number 1? It will select directly on program. So that's the power of presets for your SKAARHOJ controllers.